Good morning, and thank you for joining us again. This is the fifth of our webinars on the Essential 8 series, the fifth and final one. So thank you for joining again, whether you're listening obviously live or post recording. Talking today around application control. And just again, for some context for those that may not have listened into the previous webinars, the driver for this was we've been conducting a lot of audits and we've been working with a lot of organisations to help uplift their alignment to Essential 8. And we found that we're seeing a lot of consistency in sometimes misinterpretation, some consistency in gaps where organisations are falling short in meeting the different maturity levels. So we've put this together to try and provide that information as much as possible in a fairly casual format. Today, I'm joined again by Phil Franco from our team. Phil, thanks for joining again.
All good, Alex.
And we're also joined today by Josh Schwarz, who's the Senior Sales Engineer for Airlock Digital, a specialist in this area. I'm going to read the bio, Josh, and that's okay. The end of the formalities from mine, but I will do a formal read of this because it's a good one. So Josh helps cybersecurity teams be more proactive, which is always a good thing. Senior Sales Engineer at Airlock Digital, as I mentioned, he is a self-professed Splunk fanboy, which I think that's probably a topic for another day, Josh, but I'm sure we could talk for hours on that. And formerly a computer security analyst with a focus on all things blue team, especially digital forensics and incident response, DIFA. And also SIEM, so security information and event management. When he's not on a computer, you'll probably find him organising Sec Talks Adelaide and enjoying the Adelaide restaurant scene or attending live music. Nice to have another person from Adelaide. We've got a strong presence in Adelaide, as you know, Josh. So thank you for joining us today, mate. It's great.
No worries. Thanks for having me. Cheers.
Application control. So actually, before I start, maybe Josh, give us a little bit of background on Airlock Digital for those that may not know the business.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Alex. So Airlock Digital, we're an Australian technology provider doing app control, or allow listing as we call it. That's our bread and butter. It's all we do. So our background is actually out of Canberra. One of our founders was in federal government trying to actually do the predecessor to the Essential 8 and really struggling with the tools on the market, finding the limitations and the boundaries and just really kind of fighting to get it implemented. Over time, he started building his own dashboards and scripts and supporting kind of framework around those tools. Before you know it, actually built a product. So Airlock has been built from that groundwork, right? So we really understand this application control and allow listing space, and we kind of work in this space to help people get this rolled out. So that's kind of Airlock's background, and again, our difference here is that we're doing real kind of deny by default app control. I hate using the word zero trust, but you can think the approach we're taking with zero trust kind of networking, but applied to executable content on your machine. So it's that real foundational preventative security on desktops and servers and laptops and all of your infrastructure.
Yeah, and a really good point you make there, but what's the difference between app control and user application hardening? And again, where do you guys fit into that?
Yeah, for sure. So look, allow listing or app control is really about kind of drawing a line in the sand. You know, hey, here is the list of approved executables, applications, install packages, browser extensions, and anything that's outside of that boundary is going to get blocked from running, right? So it's a foundational control. We're kind of going, hey, here's the sandbox you're allowed to play within. Anything that happens outside that sandbox is going to get blocked before it has a chance to run. The user app hardening, on the flip side, I think of that more as I'll say vulnerability management. It might not be the right words, but it's more about, you know, once we're in that sandbox, there's certain behaviors that we know we don't want. So in your allow list, you may have said, hey, I trust Microsoft, right? I want Windows updates to run and I want Outlook to be able to self-update. But within that, there's certain Microsoft tools that we don't want being able to do certain things. So, you know, in those user app hardening, there's things like, you know, stop your PDF browser from opening certain libraries or network connections. It's like, cool, well, your PDF browser is going to be in your allow list. So now we might need to go a little bit further and go, cool, I don't want this particular behavior of that product being allowed to run. So that would fall, in our world, we call it block listing. That would help kind of solve some of the user app hardening, but it's really about that, yeah, restriction further within the allow list.
Yeah. And extending on that, it's obviously one of the 8 strategies within Essential 8. Why is it so important? What's the issue here? And where does it rank? I always ask this question: where does it rank? You got 8 strategies. Is there a ranking against the others?
Yeah, yeah. Look, it's an interesting question. ACSC used to have app control as number one until they rejigged it
Yeah,
last year. It's now, I think, number 4 or 5. I don't know how much I read into that, but look, app control is really important because it's such a foundational security control. With app control in place, there's flow-on effects, right? There's less apps you need to patch and stay on top of. The shadow IT problem just disappears, right? You're not going to get compromised by some third-party tool you didn't even know you had in your environment because it's not in your allow list, it doesn't run. It also has flow-on effects to all your other Essential 8 controls. So again, I mentioned the patching piece, MFA, we know which apps need to have MFA turned on because I've only got a defined list inside my allow list. And again, I keep saying foundational because it really is that foundational piece, right? And it leads on to things like less EDR alerts coming through. Because again, if a user gets an email and double clicks on an attachment or hits the download button on the wrong website, they then go to run that tool. It's not going to be allowed to run because it's not in my list, right? So that class of hot problem just disappears. I don't now wait for the EDR alert to trigger and have to jump in and work out what's going on, because we prevent that before it actually runs.
yeah, right. And Phil, from what you're seeing with the audits that we've been conducting, um, I guess the thought process here is level of user understanding of app control amongst businesses, amongst managed service providers. How are you seeing this particular control being addressed by our clients?
Yeah, okay, good question, Alex. I guess from what I've seen out there with our clients is sometimes there's a bit of confusion, especially going through the E8 assessments with restriction of local admin privileges. They try and mistakenly see that as a mitigation to controlling applications on the device. And then when we explain to them that even a normal user without admin privileges can execute potential malicious code, and that's not great. So we try and just provide that context for the client, that local admin privilege restrictions is not the same as having application control. As Josh mentioned, having a predefined like denied by default unless you are approved to run within my organization is totally different to having restricted admin privileges on the device. It just stops that. As you said, Josh, you don't like to refer to like 0-day exploits. But like if there's certain libraries that are only permitted to run with the allowable scripts, those are the only files that are going to run on the box, and something malicious, if a user clicks on something malicious, app control will take care of that. So that's one thing I've noticed, Alex, a bit of an understanding gap there with regards to application control. And I guess another misconception out there is, I don't know, Josh, if you experienced this, a lot of organizations, they tend to be not scared, but a bit cautious of implementing application control because they see it as a huge undertaking. Okay, that can be the case, but if you've got the right tools, it's pretty straightforward, to be honest, to deploy it. I've deployed it a couple of times. And with the right tools, it's pretty painless to get going and set up within an environment. So that's something else that I've picked up, Alex, during the audits. There's a bit of apprehension to go down the app control path. But once you explain it to the customer, they tend to come on board.
Yeah, it's definitely something we see. Yeah,
Yeah.
everyone got scarred kind of 10, 15 years ago by app locker.
Hmm.
And yeah, got burnt pretty hard, and everyone's been left with a bad taste in their mouth. But as you said, Phil, it's about choosing the right tool. And again, Airlock's been built from that place of understanding. So one thing you'd notice with Airlock versus something like that app locker piece, right, is we've really thought about that end user experience and put them front and center, right? You can't do deny by default and impact end user productivity. They're just not going to fight, right? We often joke that the most secure environment is one without end users, but that doesn't make a very good business, right? So it's always about finding that balance between the two.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the uh, as you go up the maturity levels? Probably one for well, either of you actually, or both of you. But as you go up the maturity, what's the differences between ML1 to ML3 within Essential 8 for app control?
Sure. I can jump in there, Alex, and then Josh, if you feel free to jump in. So typically around maturity level one, Alex, it's more focused around, I guess, workstations and the, I guess, protecting, user profiles, temporary folders on the OS, those sort of controls. And as you move up the maturity level, when you go to ML2, then it's more allowed, I guess they're bringing in the more the server infrastructure and internet-facing servers. They start integrating, I guess, or start requesting controls around Microsoft application block lists, bringing that in to secure and harden the environment a little bit more. Then finally, this is just at a high level. There's more controls, obviously, if you dig down. Then at a high level, then ML3, there's the ACSCs are looking at more blocking vulnerable driver block lists within the organization. And also, there's a bit of a focus then on, um, I guess, the analysis of, I guess, cyber threats within an environment. So, what are organizations doing at that level? Like, if they do see a lot of blocks within the environment, what are organizations doing that? So, it's around the process, then that's what they're trying to get at as you move up that maturity ladder. That's that's what it is at a high level. Yeah, from what I can
Yeah,
recall.
100%.
Yep.
Yeah, and just building off that a bit, I think one thing I've seen quite a lot, the difference between maturity level 2 and 3 isn't a great deal.
Mm,
But the maturity level 1 to level 2 is a huge jump. So if you think that you are on a journey to ML2 or 3, I think it needs a completely different approach to if you're doing an ML1 type project, right? The tools you choose, the processes you put in place, the scope of the rules, they completely change. Again, if you aim for level 2, it's probably a little bit of process change to get to level 3. From
mhm,
level 1 to level 2, it's probably rip out your tool and start again sort of territory. And I'd say again, getting kind of a step away from the E8, textbook, what does it say? I think from where I'm sitting, the biggest thing between the three levels is kind of the way we think about building policy, and the way we approach it, right? Certain things that I would be okay with in a level 1 policy, I wouldn't be happy with in a level 3 policy. So to quantify that, right, what does that mean? Well, when we're building policy, we're always thinking about kind of risk to the business. What outcomes are we trying to drive? If I think maturity level 1, I'm thinking more about just stopping run-of-the-mill malware, right? Stopping users downloading dodgy files, stopping ransomware drive-by malware attacks. As we move up to maturity level kind of 2 and 3, I'm now starting to think about, more sophisticated attackers, maybe persistent threats, maybe nation state level attackers potentially if you're at that ML3 level. And so there's certain things that, again, in an ML1 world, I might be okay with placing trust in particular directories or in particular vendors in my environment that I might not be happy with in ML2 or 3. So, it's not uncommon to see path rules used a lot at the lower levels and maybe used a bit less at the higher levels, or maybe tying a path rule to a particular vendor or a particular user context or something like that. Again, we're building those rules a little bit more securely when we're thinking up the chain versus maybe just kind of, I'll call them quick and dirty rules in that ML1. Again, draw a line in the sand. Cool. We want to stop the low hanging fruit in that ML1 world.
What, are you seeing most organisations sort of aiming for ML1, or people? What's the common theme there? And where should I be if I'm a small to medium business? Where should I be aiming for?
Yeah, I think again, there's no right answer here, right? It's very much about your organization. You could
Mm.
be a five-man shop that's critical to the defense supply chain, and that might put you at a level 2, right? On the flip side, you could be a 100-seat business that is just, again, run-of-the-mill, pretty, I'll call it generic business, right? And you might be ML1. That might be totally appropriate for what you're doing. So I think it is about that risk-based approach. If you know that you're going to get attention from, sophisticated attackers, well, you're probably already straight away into the ML2, 3 world. Um, Versus, if you're just trying to stop users doing the wrong thing, then you're probably more at that ML1 world. I think in my experience, I'm seeing a lot of ML1. I'm seeing a little bit of ML2. I'd say a lot of people are kind of, when they're talking to me, they're kind of on this journey. They'd call themselves at a 1.5, right? Everything's at ML1. A few things are at that ML2 level. Again, everyone's always aiming for the next level up. And I think that's a really healthy spot to be. But yeah, I think, it's also really important to flag not everyone is going to need to be at ML3.
Yeah, absolutely. And from I just want to touch on something. You used the term before, apprehension. You said one of the issues is that there's some apprehension around the complexity of implementing this. What does an implementation of a solution like Airlock look like? What's the journey look like? Length of time, requirements from client, and so on. What does the methodology of a deployment look like?
Okay. Based on my experience, Alex, initially, naturally you deploy all the agents out there within the environment, and I'd say with the first month you are learning what's out there within the environment. You'll be surprised how many applications are discovered through the process and get reported into the console. And then I guess once you have that list of applications, and it's working with business stakeholders and different departments to understand if all these applications that are discovered are required within the organization before you go down the path of, whitelisting them to allow them to execute within environments. And that can take some time, depending on the business, the size of the business. But typically, I'd say within a month, dedicated project time, you'll have a pretty firm grip on the apps that are allowed or sanctioned to run within the environment. And then from there, then you can you can transition over to enforcement. I know within Airlock's dashboard, as the number of unknown executables drop closer to the 0 mark, you're getting to a safe space to flick that switch. Also, what I've seen, the apprehension part is I've seen more organizations out there, they tend to only deploy to workstations, and they are very apprehensive deploying to server infrastructure. But I'd say to them, the process is the same. I guess with application control solutions out there, just ensure that before you go into enforcement mode, that the servers, I know back in the day, Josh, I don't know if it's still the same, servers need to do a reboot cycle to capture all the services that get spun up and all the files get registered. And once you've done that and you're confident and you've brought that number down to 0 again, I'd say then you're in a safe place to turn over to enforcement mode. But I think it's key, 2 things. One, getting that number down to a reasonable number, close to 0 as possible, of untrusted executions. And 2, working with the business, understanding the applications are within the business and whether they are required or not. That should clean up a lot of noise. That would be from a high overview. That's been my experience, Alex.
Josh, sorry, just to expand on that one. That point Phil made around the apprehension with servers. I saw you nodding there, so I'm assuming that's something you see quite regularly as well.
Yeah, look, we see it all, right? And again, I think it is a lot of the time because I've never had to convince someone that allow listing and app control is a good idea. I've just had to convince them that, what you experienced 10 years ago isn't the way today. And I think, again, it's a very obvious control. When you get the policy wrong, it's right in your face. You see a notification, you can't launch the app, right? And I think a lot of the apprehension came from in the past not being able to resolve that quickly, right? And not being able to get someone unstuck and keep them working. And again, on a workstation, that's frustrating, right? But we can often work around it. Maybe they can work off a browser, maybe they can work on a different project for an hour or two while we fix it. But on that server, world, right? If you block the website or a core business app, that could be, severe impact to the wider business. So again, it's very much about make sure you've got the right tools so that you can see, build your policy, refine your policy, simulate what's going to happen before you actually do it, all that sort of stuff. And with that in place, the right processes and the right tools, it shouldn't be too scary at all. You should have complete confidence you know what's about to happen, and you've got the ability to get unstuck if you need it.
There is a procedural piece here, to that point. Once you get to enforcement mode, there's a process, isn't there? I want to install something new, or I suddenly need something. I need go to webinar, right? I need to be able to install the app. How do organisations approach that? Because I think from my perspective, from what I've seen, I think there's still this concept or this theory of set and forget, and that's obviously not the case.
Yeah, I'd love to sit here and say app control is set and forget. We've got AI built into the platform and all that sort of stuff, but ultimately that completely mitigates the whole point of app control, right? So, app control plus AI, you've just rebuilt EDR. So again, there will be some impact in terms of processes that need to be, done on the back end when a new app comes out, how you're going to deploy it, who's going to approve it, all that sort of stuff. Again, often it's just about getting the right tools in the hands of the right people. It's a very easy process. We might add a couple of minutes to an existing software deployment packaging kind of process. So within Airlock, we've done a lot of this heavy lifting with a feature we call one-time pad. And so you're able to, grant someone a code, a temporary code, and for a period of time, they'll be able to run the app or install the app or whatever. So I went through that workflow. Alex, you mentioned GoToMeeting, right? We're a Zoom shop. I didn't have it installed, so I got blocked. So I was able to go to the Airlock admin, go, hey, I'm joining this webinar. I need this app to be running, please. They gave me an 8-digit code. I typed that in. Now I've got go to running perfectly happily on my machine, right? So again, it's just having those processes in place so that you can get unstuck and get things moving. And again, Airlock solved a lot of the technical challenges. And there's just a few kind of people, process, change management things on the back end that you need to be highly successful.
Yeah. And with the obviously the last few minutes remaining, I'm just keen to unpack them. We've spoken about the process and what that methodology of sort of deployment and then ongoing management looks like. But from your experience, Josh, and Phil too, successful deployments, what are the tips and tricks? What are the things that people listening should do, make sure they do, to make sure they get a successful outcome here?
Yeah, cool. For me, it boils down to two kind of things I've seen people mess up and then rectify. One is going too hard, and again, this is particularly common if you've got a security background. You kind of get excited at the capability of the tool, right? Being able to get that full control back. And I was guilty of it myself when I first started using Airlock, right? I was able to completely lock down machines. But I mentioned before, right? It's about finding that balance of security outcomes and operational overhead, and balancing the risk that I'm trying to mitigate with the control. And again, I think it's really important that we have a healthy understanding of, hey, am I reviewing every single file one by one? Do I have a full-time analyst on app control, and we're building a really tight, really controlled policy where nothing comes in or out without someone having reviewed it? Or are we making, exemptions? Are we saying I trust Intune and SCCM automatically? Are we saying, trust everything code signed by Microsoft? That stuff's really going to shape the outcome or the success of the project. I think the second one is the scoping. The people I see being most successful with app control, it's a whole of IT and whole of business kind of project. So to kind of quantify that, I mentioned those exemption codes. Well, we've already got a help desk. We've got someone that's a point of contact for like support issues, right? Let's train them up to give out those codes. Hey, where'd this file come from? Are you meant to have it? Train them with the basic questions, and they can get someone back up and running, right? They can then fold the ticket on for us to review internally and make permanent changes to the rule set. On that kind of chain continued, the team responsible for packaging, the SCCM or Intune admins are normally best placed to know what apps are meant to be in the environment, when updates going out, when a new package is being deployed. And then security can play a role, kind of more of that policy oversight role, the vulnerability management role. I mentioned that the block listing or the, being able to carve out, the hardening rules. Security can play that kind of role. And when you see that kind of rolled out successfully across the business, we see great success, right? No one's really impacted. Everyone gets a minute or two added to their day here or there. And across the business, that doesn't kind of add up to cause any impact. Not to say you can't get it successfully rolled out in a security team or a desktop support team or whatever, but the companies I consistently see be most successful kind of spread that load across the teams and get the SME to solve the problems.
That is a combination, particularly small, medium businesses. Again, I'm focusing a fair bit on that sector, but often don't have internal IT. They're outsourcing to a managed IT services provider. There is some stuff they can take on internally to continue the flow without too much restriction, but obviously lean on or rely on the MSP for aspects of it only.
100%. So if we kind of follow that chain, right, maybe internally you're empowered to grant those temporary exemption codes, and then the MSP that's managing software updates and software deployments is responsible for that. I'll call it the core offering of the allow list, right? So again, I think whoever has that responsibility is the one that's best placed to be kind of taking over that part of the solution.
Yeah, one of the things I think we see quite a lot is just that expectation that it's all on the MSP, but then having the ability or it being a bit of a blocker if there's some time delays in terms of responsiveness. There might not be SLAs in place for these sort of actions. So I think businesses having to understand that they can take control of some of this stuff without having to have all of that deep technical knowledge, at least to keep operational, is important. Phil, just over to you, mate, with the last couple of minutes, just on the same point.
So yeah, so what in my opinion also to say to Josh, what makes a successful deployment would be take the business along on the journey, clear communication with stakeholders, train up internal staff, as you mentioned, Josh, get help desk involved or your SCCM expert involved early on in the project, define the roles. Also important, basic things, get pilot groups going with key stakeholders in each department, get buy-in from those levels around the organization, show them how good the product is and what it can do for them. And then also, when we start talking about the service side of things, also go gradually. You don't have to migrate 300 servers, turn it on overnight. Just grab one or two of the less critical servers, get comfortable with how things operate, and then gradually stage it through into the environment. And then that communication piece is vital, and working with the business and being clear with them what we are trying to achieve. I think that will go a long way.
Yeah, but in terms of deployment time, we're talking a couple of months. You're suggesting here that sort of lead time?
Depending on the environment, yeah, it looks like if it's a complex, larger environment, realistically probably 2 to 3 months before everything's turned on. If it's a simpler environment with no server infrastructure, just workstations, you could get it on pretty quickly. It just depends on the complexity of the organization. Every organization is different, but then again, it's not a race. I mean, just do it calmly, do it properly, and you'll get there.
I think to that point, Phil, a bad allow list is still a great security outcome. And I think that's the real key takeaway here, right? A bad allow list is still a great foundational, fundamental control. You've gone from an infinite number of apps that a user can download from the internet and kind of hit go on to a much restricted set. And I think that's the key thing we need to remember here.
Yeah, that's a really important point. We are at time. It's incredible how fast half an hour goes. So I'm going to stop asking questions there. Thank you, Josh, for taking your time out to jump on this and talk to us. That was great. It was really interesting to hear what Airlock's doing and all of that experience. And Phil, thank you again for joining us. That's the last one of the E8 series. Thanks everyone for listening in. A reminder, you can listen to these through our website. They are available through the MyEmpire Group website. And if you follow us on LinkedIn, you can also catch up on any future webinars, and there are a couple that we'll be announcing shortly that will occur in the next month or so. Thanks again, guys. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks
Josh.
both. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.